Mark Gottfried, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. Jerry and I are really honored to have you on.
Was a pleasure. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this. So thank you for having me.
We've had a great run this past year, including a former ACC colleague of yours, Roy Williams. And Roy was telling us when he came on that he never really wanted to retire, and he missed the practices and stuff like that. Well, what about you? Were you ready to retire? Or you're not retired, you're refiring, but did you miss
Yep.
the day to day of college basketball?
First of all, I agree. I don't ever use the word retire. I'm just kind of transitioning to I got my podcast and speaking, but there are things you miss about coaching. I think for me more than anything, John, it was the relationships with the players and the locker room. Every now and then you see guys coming in the locker room, big win, they're dancing, everybody's hugging. That's the stuff that I kind of miss. The day-to-day grind of recruiting, not as much. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it, but it was tedious. But I do miss some of that interaction with the players, that locker room, that team, that unit. You build a special bond, in there with your teams, and I can completely relate to what Roy said on that one.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
well, today with the portal the way it is right now, it's almost impossible to build a bond. They're leaving, you have them for 1 year and all of that stuff. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
and Jerry, I tell people this all the time, and all my coaches that are my friends, and a lot of guys have gotten out. Tony Bennett and Jim Larinaga and Jay Wright and all the guys, my buddies, and Jim Boeheim, and the thing that's the struggle for the older coach, the guys that have coached, for 30 years or so is if I recruited a player, a lot of times I may start recruiting him as a ninth or 10th grader. And so you're building a relationship, 10th grade year in high school, 11th, 12th, and then you get them in college, then you got them freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. A lot of times it's a 5 or 6 or 7 year process. And so now that whole script is flipped. Everybody has to kind of operate with a 1 year transactional team. And for us that coached a long time ago, that's a different landscape altogether. I think the younger coaches they can adapt, but some of us that coached before, I do think it gets a little bit just frustrating at times.
frustrating and sad too, because that relationship, you can't, build this deep
No.
relationship when you think about players who, look at their coach as a father figure, let's just use that, right? That's not built over, hey, I was there for 6 months and then headed out. Like that's built over those years and those growth and also those difficult moments of growth. Not the, hey, I came in, I did great, and then I left, but
Yeah.
like I struggled and that's when coach picked me up and I lost my starting spot or I wasn't starting or I had to hear a hard truth and this whole system now has basically eliminated the hard truth. The hard
Yeah.
truth becomes, I'll just leave and go someplace where they won't tell me the hard truth, right? And that's not coaching anymore.
No. First of all, I think they got to call it what it is. It's professional sports on college campuses. Let's call
Hmm.
it what it is. Guys are getting paid to play, and it's pro sports with
Hmm.
no contracts, by the way, and so it's different. But I think for me too, here's the way I look at it too. Here's the frustrating part. College, in my view, this is my opinion, has always been that for all of us, whether you play sports or not, it's that transitional period from being a high school student to being a young adult out on your own. And so those couple 2 or 3 or 4 years when you're 18, 19, 20, that era of your life, that was the time. That's what I've always believed when a lot of great lessons are taught. Like you mentioned, when the going gets tough, guys not playing, uh, you're coaching him really hard. It's not going the way he wants it to go or he thought it would go. And I believe there was a period where the best part about it was the transitional learning how to cope and deal with all that. I go back to Alabama and some of the guys I coached there. They just told me, they said, Coach, I'd have left after my freshman year. I didn't get to play, and I'd have left. I'd have went somewhere else. But they stayed, they hung in there, um, and the best part about it was they got better. They had to get better to play. Like you have to improve on your game to get there. And so that whole part of learning how to fight through adversity, get to the next step, and then come out a winner on the other end. I think we're losing that, and that bothers me because college is a it's that transitional place where we get to learn those good, tough, hard lessons of life. And I do think we're missing some of those. It's a cut and run deal right now, and I don't know that that's in the long term, the rest of it, somebody's life. I just don't know that that serves the kids the best.
Yeah. Is it, this is not the topic of the podcast, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think a lot of people, ask us about this sort of stuff, like, well, is it fixable? And I think, like you said, first, let's just admit it's professional sports done on college campuses, right? And then number two, well, how do we change that? And your colleagues, like who got out and stuff that you mentioned, the names you mentioned, do we fix it by, hey, you got to sign a contract like you do with a pro team? There is, or hey, there's a transfer portal, but you get one shot at it, right? You can't be, four teams in 5 years and things like that. Is there a way to get back to this where the kids can make some money, which they probably deserve, but then they are also put in an environment where they can grow? What do you think?
Well, there's so much to that, but I'll give you my shortest version. Number one, yes, contracts, they have to have contracts. You have to have that. In other words, when I coached, I got paid pretty good money, but I also had a buyout in my contract. Like if I chose to leave and break the contract, whether it was going to be me personally or the next school, somebody had to pay
Yeah.
because I was promised a salary, I was promised a contract by Alabama or by NC State. But so on the flip side, then it was fair. Okay, you're going to guarantee me X amount of money. Well, then the school says, okay, but if you break the contract and leave, you have a buyout. And I think kids have to have that. That's number one. Number two, I think the portal has to be a one-time free shot, but after that, we go back to the good old days where you got to sit a year. And I think
Mhm.
that'll discourage some of what's going on. But I also think, that the NIL was and Ed O'Bannon, I coached him for 5 years at UCLA. I coached Ed, and he kind of led the charge with this whole NIL thing. Is that truly when EA Sports or Coca-Cola or Nike or Adidas, whoever it is, if they want to put you on a billboard and pay you and they feel like that's worth it for them, then that's true NIL. But we're
Mhm.
not in a true NIL. We're in a pay to play, offering you X amount of money to come play for me. And if that's going to be the case, then just like pro sports, whatever that agreement is, it ought to be known to the public. If it's
Mhm.
for $500,000 or $5 million, and this kind of secret under the table, who's getting what money, I just don't know that that's the healthy thing either for the whole big picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we could definitely go down that rabbit hole for a while for sure. But yeah, we'll cut. But no, I agree. I mean, hopefully there'll be some change because
Yeah.
as a former college athlete, knowing how impactful those years were and stuff. And I mean, maybe it's just a good transition because obviously you as a college athlete also transferred, right? Started and then finished up at Alabama and whatever. So you live
Yeah.
that transfer. What was the decision as a player behind your transfer?
When I was a high school athlete and I took official recruiting visits, I went to Duke and Ohio State and Alabama, all these schools, and I chose Oral Roberts because of the coach. I really
Mm,
liked him, and he got fired at mid-year, Christmas time of my freshman year. And so for me, everything changed, the landscape changed. In those situations, or even if it's just a kid just realizes, hey, you know what, this was not the right place for me. I
mhm,
made a choice to go to this school, and I'm now realizing, you know what, I don't, this doesn't really fit. But for me, it ended up turning out wonderful. I wanted to play at the highest level of college basketball. And no knock on Oral Roberts, but I wanted to play in the SEC or the ACC or the Big Ten or whatever it was. I had worked my entire life trying to become a good player. And I kind of felt sitting there at Oral Roberts that, I wanted to go against Kentucky. I wanted to go against North Carolina. I wanted to see if I could compete at that level and be a good player at that level.
mhm.
And those two things kind of for me were the factors for me, deciding to transfer. And I say this all the time to people. Sometimes a transfer is good. It's good for both parties. It's good for the
Yeah.
school that maybe you're leaving.
Hmm.
I've had a couple, 3 or 4 guys that have transferred in that I've played for, and it's worked out fantastic for them. So I'm not against the transfer. I think it's a 1 year deal, but
Yeah.
those are the reasons why it came down for me to end up going to Alabama.
Mm. Did you know that you'd get into coaching? I mean, your dad was a coach, and then your dad was an athletic director at South Alabama for many years, and a legend, and had mutual friends that knew your dad well, and always just spoke so highly of him as a boss and as a leader and everything. So you kind of had that in your blood. Like, what was it about your dad? What did you learn from him about coaching and leadership? And
Wow, there's so much to that one. So just to give you a quick background, when we were very young, my family was from a little town about an hour north of Columbus, Ohio, called Crestline, Ohio. And in that little town, you had Jack Harbaugh, that's my godparent, who then his 2 sons, Jim and John Harbaugh, are both head coaches now in the NFL. And we all grew up together. We all kind of grew up around, and then my dad coached. His brother Mike Gottfried coached football. He was the head coach at Pitt and Kansas and Cincinnati. So like Jim and John Harbaugh and myself, we just grew up around it. That's all we knew. And kind of blue collar, families that grew up with not a lot. And that little town was a railroad town. It was a hardworking town. Great pride in the little in the community there, but we just grew up around it. And, I'm in the locker room when I'm 6 or 8 or 10 years old, and I'm watching my dad on the board, and I'm watching a post game or pre-game speech. I sat on the end of the bench when he was the coach at a Division III school called Ashland College way back in the day. It's now Ashland University, but I just grew up around it, and I loved it. Um, I loved, watching my uncle coach football. I wasn't a football player, but I love the interaction. I got you learn about all the things about putting a coaching staff together, that bond you get with a coaching staff and your players. So for me, it just kind of made sense. It's something I always wanted to do. And again, just like when I was a player, I wanted to compete at the highest level. And as a coach, same thing. I want to compete at the highest level. And I'm not doing this you know, just to have something to do. I'm trying to win a national championship and either be the best you can, just like all of us, Jim, John Harbaugh, Jack, Mike Gottfried, Joe Gottfried. It was just the way we were raised.
I love it. Um, do you have, Jerry always talks about a lesson in leadership he learned from his dad was a battalion chief in the New York City Fire Department, and at 11 or 12, and a very particular lesson. And he's told the story on the podcast here before. I won't tell it again, but do you have one? Do you have like a particular moment that you remember that you can look back now that maybe you didn't realize in the moment? You're like, man, that's leadership, or that's coaching, or that's why I want to do this.
When I was young, and again, there's like that could be an hour long answer right there. But when I was young, it was funny. We had a basketball hoop in our garage, and I'm probably fifth grade, sixth grade. I'm like 10, 11, 12. My dad never ever. We played one on one. He wouldn't let me beat him ever. And I'd go to my bedroom and cry. My mom would always say, "Joe, you ought to let him win every now and then." And he said, "No, I'm not letting him win." And eventually, I had to just keep working and working to where I got to about the ninth grade, like, okay, I think I can beat him now. And so just that lesson where I wasn't ever given anything. You had to earn it. You have to earn that. And my father too, even when he coached, um, and he had assistant coaches, and I was kind of privy to, the interactions, and I learned quickly how important loyalty was, just loyal to those that help you. Those we have people, and even I was a head coach and I hire an assistant coach and I give them the opportunity. And in return, I expect loyalty, not blind loyalty. I'm not talking about doing stuff that's, not ethical, but, loyal, being a part of a team and supporting, those that are above you. And so I learned a lot of those lessons. I watched my Uncle Mike as a football coach. He was the head coach at Murray State one time. He had 100 guys, 100 players in a locker room, all holding hands, and they're singing "Love Lifted Me." And I just remember, like, wow, what an opportunity for an impact. I think I was about in eighth or ninth grade, and I saw that. I was like, it made an impression on me. But it was hard work, and nothing's given to you for free.
Mm.
You got to earn it, and we're not real interested in any excuses. Those are the lessons when I was very, very young.
Pretty powerful and consistent ones that we hear from a lot of people who make it to the top. Jerry, jump in here. I know you got some thoughts.
I have a few for sure. One of the things I like to do is just sort of shift gears for a minute, Mark, and get down to a little concrete, practical uh, philosophy that you have. I'm familiar with the work you're doing, and I'm very intrigued by your GID, the GIT approach, which for the listener is grit, integrity, and desire. Do I have that right?
Absolutely.
And so it's very intriguing. You talk about how it empowers people to achieve greatly. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind unpacking that a little bit and give us some coaching here.
With the GID approach, it's a get it done mindset. You got to get it done. At the end of the day, whatever it is we're doing, in sports, in life, in business, in family, at the end of the day, sometimes, you got to get it done. And I always tell this story, Jerry, and I was coaching at Alabama. We're playing Stanford in the NCAA tournament. They're number one in the country. They were 30-1. Our
Mm,
team was 16-12. We were the last team to be picked that year. This is 2004. And when you're watching the selection show, and they've got at that time it was 64 teams. There's 63 names that are on the board, and we had the nation's toughest schedule. That was in our favor, but our record wasn't. And we make the tournament, and we play Southern Illinois in the round one, the 8 seed versus 9 seed. It's the booby prize game, by the way, because
Yeah.
the winner 8-9, you got to play number one. So hey, we're glad you're here and glad you came to the party, but you may not be here very long. But anyway, we played Stanford. They were 30-1. Halftime, Jerry, it's 39-36. We're doing okay. We start the second half and we miss our first 17 shots. Didn't
Oof.
make a basket. Call timeout. We're down about 10 or 12. And at that moment, I remember telling our players, this is a get it done moment. You're going to have them throughout your whole life. We can get on a plane, go back to Tuscaloosa. Hey, we're playing number one team in the country. Matter of fact, they were the number one of the one seeds. They were the pick to win it that year. But we talked in that huddle about the opportunity to get it done. And they walked away from me, as we left the huddle, and they huddled up amongst themselves. I could hear them all saying, "We're going to get this done. Let's go right now. Get it done. Get it done." And I remember saying to myself, "Man, I think they got it. Like they got it. I hope we win, but they got it. Like they got the lesson." And we came out and played really well in the second half, and we upset Stanford that year and knocked them out of the tournament, knocked the one seed out. But the GID mindset, and I kind of build it on grit and dive deep into developing grit in your life and what that really means. And then integrity, Jerry. And I'm honest when I speak on stage and to other people that there are times I put my foot in a bear trap, and you know I allowed my moral compass to get shattered, and I had to restore it at times and put it back together, which is hard at times. But I talk a lot about integrity and making right choices and doing things the right way. And then we talk a lot about desire, really, how bad do you really want it? People talk about it all the time, Jerry. Like when I recruited players, I always ask them the question. I said, "Do you want to be a great player?" "Oh yeah, coach, yeah." "Oh yeah, I want to be a great player." "But do you love it? Like really love it?" Because when you really love it, then you know you probably are going to become a great player because that love's going to push you through all those tough hard times because man, I love this process. So the whole concept behind the GID mindset approach, I kind of try to build on those, and then obviously I got a million stories from coaching, but I think it's just part of the fabric of who we all can become because we all got to get it done at the end of the day, no matter what. You
Mm.
got to get it done, period.
hmm
Mhm.
You mentioned, yeah, we mentioned the love piece in that. Well, you mentioned love, and God, you were at UCLA, and I remember when Coach John Wooden retired, he was asked by all the media at the time, they have microphones in his face, So, coach, tell us, why were you so successful? And his answer resonates with me like every time I think about this subject. And he said, that was easy, guys. I had a lot of love in my coaching.
Mm,
I'm just wondering
mm,
what you think about that statement, and if you sort of can align with that with your
yeah.
coaching. What does that mean? What is love? How do you define love in leadership, and how important was it to you, and how did that manifest?
Well, it's a great question. And, let me say too, before I kind of answer that, in that, my 7 years at UCLA, I coached there. I had the opportunity to probably sit on John Wooden's couch, just he and I, the two of us. I bet you it's 40 or 50 times. I mean, he was so generous with his time, but the lessons that I learned from John Wooden are off the chart, and there's a lot of them. But when you mention love, and I think with him, when you go back to Coach Wooden, and he was probably for me the best example, and his former players, the guys that played for him, and now they were older, obviously. They were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, some of the guys that he coached when I was there. Um, they felt from him that he had a authentic, genuine love, to help them become better, but also for them as people. And I think in leadership, so many times, and what I tried to do, and I wasn't always successful, but I tried to do, is to really dive in and get to know the players, my assistant coaches, and truly show that I am very interested. I want to know, and because I care about you. And even after guys would leave, and I've got some players right now, probably 6 or 8 or 9, still playing in the NBA, and playing overseas and playing around, and other guys are in business. But just that, um, interest in them in their lives and what it's all about. Because I always believe this: if players and even in any leadership role, the people that you work with, if they believe that you truly care about them, that you do love them as people, I think you got a great chance for success. You have it improves everything. And some even the coaches that are tough and hard, and you see that these gnarly faces on the sideline, a lot of those guys still, boy, they care about their players,
Yeah.
truly care. And I think that's and John Wooden to me was probably the best example of that.
Hmm.
I remember the story, if I may sort of recount this one, is another one is Bill Walton walked in after the summer, and he's sporting a beard.
Yeah.
And a lot of coaches would say, "Hey, you know the rules here. Get out of here. Get that beard off." But he said, "So, Bill, you really look good in that beard. Um, but I'm wondering, do you want to play for UCLA, or do you want to keep that beard?" And in 20 minutes, Bill Walton came back completely clean shaved, and he said, "Coach, I'm here." But just the way he handled that
He is the best. Yeah.
created a feeling in Bill Walton, what he that's his statement, not mine, that he felt that he could die for this coach,
Yeah.
and
And he,
because of the way he was treated, and the caring that he demonstrated.
hmm I can remember sitting with Coach Wooden one day, and it was early in the morning, and he lived in a 3 bedroom apartment in Encino, California, that it was the most modest place. Now, here's a guy that, you want to go Mount Rushmore of coaches now. He's on Mount Rushmore, and I don't care what anybody says. Now, I argue with folks sometimes. Greatest coach of all time, any sport, any level. When you win 10 national championships in 12 years, you kind of put a stamp on that one. For me, it's kind
Yeah.
of done. But I remember sitting there with him one morning, and I'm sitting kind of on the couch. He's at his desk, and he was always generous to, sign autographs and sign if, hey, I wanted to send a pyramid of success to one of my buddies. But, just kind of out of nowhere, he looked right at me and he said, "Mark, I never want you to forget this." And I'm leaning in, and I can remember it through the window, the
I am
sunlight
too.
coming through the window. It's like magical all of a sudden. And he said to me, he said, "Mark, don't ever forget this, that the softest pillow in the world is a clear conscience." And every time I would ever ask him a
Wow.
question, I would get answers like sitting at the feet of this wonderful wise man, like, the parables. Or if I said, Coach, tell me about integrity, he would tell me a story about Bill Walton or somebody. Well, Mark, in 1971, and then you'd get this amazing story. But there were so many lessons learned from him, and the guys like Bill Walton and Jamal Wilkes and Mike Warren, who our age will remember, played in Hill Street Blues for years, and all the guys, Gail Goodrich and Sidney Wicks. I mean, you go down the line now, they all had an affection for him
Mm.
because they knew his heart. And it wasn't just about winning. Winning was a byproduct of everything else. It was about his heart and his leadership, in my view, as to why, he became so successful.
And that, I mean, everything you just said. First of all, I love that quote. The softest pillow is a clear conscience, and I imagine, you talked about times when we all lose our North Star and we pull off and we compromise things to win
Mhm.
because society or our boss or someone tells us to do that. And you don't sleep well at night. The way you treat your athletes, the way you treat your staff, the way you conduct yourself in the world, and so what amazing advice that he gives there. Everything you've just spoken about here, all the other amazing coaches we've had on here. I mean, just in the basketball world, from Steve Kerr to Roy to
Quinn
Phil
Snyder.
Jackson to Tara Vanderveer to all these coaches say the same thing, that it starts with the relationships and things like that. Yet I go around and I speak at all these sports coaching conferences or licensing things across sports, and no one talks about that. No one talks about that. And yet, if you ask anyone in your position or at the highest, what are the most important qualities of a great coach? What are the most important um, things that will make you a great coach? And then say, where's that in your coaching manual? It's not in there. And this is a problem, don't you think?
I do, and that's a wonderful point. And I can remember sitting with, again, John Wooden, and we talked X's and O about basketball. Every now and then we'd talk about his 2-2-1 press, but 99% of the time it was the lessons of life. And that he was giving those lessons to all of his players and all of his coaches for years and years and years. Um, and that's the beauty of coaching and really leadership. Like he made a comment to me one time. I asked him. I said, Coach, were you ever a yeller and a screamer? Did you like guys nowadays are up and down the sidelines and they're animated? And he said, here was his answer. He said, Mark, when I was young, I did scream a lot, but as I got older, and this is the way John Wooden would say an answer right here. He said, but as I got older, he said, I learned that I would rather soften my voice and have my players strain to listen than constantly raise my voice and have them cover their ears. And if you think about even that, like his ability to articulate a lesson, and there was a million of them, but I think you're so right. We go to coaching clinics or we go to, conferences, and it happens in business all the time. And we're learning some tools on how to do well in that industry. How do you, really get your best player shot? Talk to us about attacking a matchup zone. And we do all that. And you need that. It's like in any walk of life, even in business, in sales. But on top of that, there's that ability to dive a little deeper into, what really makes somebody good. How do we get to that level? And some of it is the technical part, but to me, it's bigger than that.
So it starts with you. Like it starts with self-awareness and knowing yourself. And that's, again, John, and again, Mark Gottfried was not the same man at 25 and 55. Neither was John Wood, neither are any of us, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
So we grow, but really that deep dive into self-awareness and self-understanding is the essence of leadership, whether you're in the military or coaching a team or running a sales team, right? And I think for the most part, people are people and they want the same
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Jerry has an acronym that he calls the river. When you make people feel, relevant and important and validated and empowered and respected, that's when you get their best, right? And talent might be a ceiling, right? You can't love a player from 6'5" to 7 feet tall, but you can make him the best 6'5" player out there. Make him feel like he's 7 feet tall. And I think that's important for realizing potential.
And on top of that, you make some great points. On top of that, I think, and I use this word a lot. I use it all the time with people. It's self-honesty. I you know, here's what I think. Human nature. It's just human nature. Sometimes we candy coat things to ourselves a lot. Like, well, I I kind of worked as hard as I really wanted to work, but the reality is, did you really? Or when you make mistakes, it's hard for sometimes people to own up to those mistakes. Well, it was really their fault. It really wasn't my fault. This, that, but I think when people have the ability to be self-honest,
Yeah.
self-critical, honest with yourself, look in there and say, okay, how could I have been better? What am I not doing right now that I need to be better? It's also in any walk of life, it's understanding roles. Like basketball players, I coached obviously for years and years and years. Being self-honest, okay, being completely honest and saying what truly is your role. What are you good at? And I'm not going to spend all my time doing the things I'm not very good at. So every person in the organization, if they can, be self-honest. Let's really be honest. Who are you? What do you bring to the table? And then you bring that, whatever that is, to the table. You mentioned Steve Kerr. He's done a spectacular job as a coach. But as a player, Steve Kerr did what he does. He made shots. He shot the ball. He wasn't trying to drive it in there and, make ridiculously tough acrobatic shots and having his shot blocked left and right. But he did what he did, and so understanding roles, being completely self-honest, like bear it all out there, break it down in your and even in every walk of life, I find it all the time. People they fudge on what really happened. It really wasn't that bad. No, wasn't very good. Period. I mean, just be honest. And how do we get better? Because if you can't be self-honest, you're probably not going to be able to take the steps to improve at whatever it is you're doing.
Hmm.
So this is really interesting. It kind of segues into what I was going to ask or say. Steph Curry backs you up 100% on that. There's a quote that I took out of something he's one of his interviews. He says self-awareness demands deep personal honesty.
Mm.
So there it goes, the greatest of the great understand what you're saying. And I think our listeners need to latch on to that because it's so important, that idea of self-awareness. So out of curiosity, let me ask you this personal question. What do you like best about yourself as a coach, leader, uh,
Mm.
Mark?
Wow. Been asked
Yeah,
a
wow,
lot
that's
of
a wow
questions,
question.
I've
Yeah.
never been asked that question, but probably to be honest, if I again self-honesty, I wanted to have good relationships with my guys. I probably, wasn't the greatest technical guy as far as, you know, teaching some things or coaching some things, but I did want, and I felt like I was pretty good at it, developing that relationship with my players to where, and again, everything always comes back to honesty. There are players and there are people that want it. They want you to tell them the truth. Like, tell me, coach. And when I was coaching, I always wanted my players to understand that because I care about you, I want to be honest with you. And basically, I'm going to ask you for your permission. Can I have your permission? Because what I really want to do, and I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but I want you to get better. And so I think for me, if you ask, that question, which is that's a wonderful question, that's where I thought my strength was. My strength was
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe not the other stuff, 5 minutes to go in the game, all of a sudden they jump in a 1-3-1 and we got to figure out how to attack it. Maybe
yeah,
I'm good at that, but
yeah.
I felt like relationally that was where my
Well,
strength.
you mentioned Steve Kerr, and we've had him on the podcast, and I guess I asked the question in 2015, Steve, when you won the first championship, what was the most important game you ever won? And I was thinking, well, maybe it was OKC when they were down 3-1, or maybe it was at Cleveland in the finals when they were down 2-1. He said, Jerry, he said, that's easy. He said, the most important game I won was the relationship game.
Period.
And like more listeners, more people come and listen to our podcast because they hear things like that, and it reinforces the belief that they have inside, but it's not reinforced on the outside. And having you say that is just monumental. So I want to ask you one more question. Well, maybe I'll ask you a few more, but uh, so you're telling us what you felt was your intention that you weren't always successful. People need to know that. Like I'm trying to win the relationship game. I walk into a room, I want to win the hearts of all the people. Why? Because when they open their hearts, then we really get the good work done, right?
Mhm.
So, following up with what you like most about yourself, I'm going to say, what is it that you like least about yourself when you were doing coaching, when you were coaching?
Again, if when you're being completely transparent, honest, there were times where if I look back, and it's a wonderful question, is where I sacrificed at times my integrity to win. And I mean that by saying that, you know, these lies creep into our heads, well, everybody else is doing it. I took a job at Alabama. I'm the head coach at 30. I had just turned 33. And
Wow.
I've got Nolan Richardson at Arkansas. I've got John Brady at LSU, Cliff Ellis at Auburn, Tubby was at Kentucky. All around me, Billy Donovan's at Florida. And I'm trying to compete and I'm trying to win. And in recruiting at times, you find yourself at that moment of truth and not anything astronomical. I'm not saying that, there were crazy things happening, but I do believe there were times when I look back that I think I sacrificed doing what I knew was best. And what I knew was right
Mm,
because I wanted to win.
hmm
And even if it's just, and we tell ourselves at times, well, it's just a small thing. I'm
hmm
going to make that call when I've already used up my calls for the week. I got to make up one more because I got to catch up. Or I've got to, these things. They're not huge, but we convince ourselves, or I think we do at times, it's a small thing. Everybody else is doing it. And the biggest one was nobody else will know. And so I
hmm
think there are times for all of us, and it happens in not just coaching, it happens in life. It's really when we make the poorest decisions in life is we buy into one of those lies.
hmm
And next thing you
hmm
know, we've sacrificed our integrity a bit. And for me, that one stings for me still to this day. Because
Yeah, yeah.
um, but
Uh,
it's honest though. Some
yeah.
people some people deny it, like, well, I didn't ever do it, Well, self-honest,
We
yeah.
appreciate so much your answer here, John and I do, because we've asked questions like this of other coaches and they're not transparent. And and right now you sort of if you're not transparent, I'm going to go back to GID. What does that I stand for?
That's right.
Gotcha, right? But I
It's-
don't want to do that. I kind of feel from everything I've known about you and from what I've listened to other people say that that is a priority to be have integrity. And the other thing is like we have to be easy on ourselves. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that are contrary because the temptation is too great. I mean, at that level, I mean, uh, you know, I could list you a dozen examples. Some programs I've worked with at the college level in basketball that compromised that integrity and then went back and had to pay for it. But once you recognize it, then that's the self-awareness that we're talking about. And then that's the whole idea of truth. It's so important uh, to be true to yourself.
yeah, and Jerry, that's when we learn the most, to be honest, or for me
Yeah.
personally. that's when I've really learned the most about myself, about life, about everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
sometimes, we've all done it and think, tough things have happened to us. A lot of them, sometimes it's self-inflicting. It's a self-inflicted wound. Sometimes things just happen in life.
Hmm.
And we feel like, and I have felt this way before, you got to think, imagine I'm the basketball coach at Alabama. It's my alma mater. I played there. I was a starting guard on three straight Sweet 16 teams. I loved Alabama. I loved my experience there. I get to be the head coach there. I'm the head basketball coach for 11 years at Alabama, and it's my alma mater. But they make a decision that they're going to make a coaching change. And I went back to my house and I crawled in my bed and got in a fetal position for about a day. I didn't want I was convinced the sun was not coming up tomorrow. It's the world ends today. It's it. It's over. But I have found in some of those times when you look back, that's when we have the greatest growth.
Yeah.
Not that we want to put ourselves in these rock bottom situations, but when they happen to us, we have an opportunity at that point to really look inward and say, okay, who am I? What am I all about? What when it's all said and done, what do I want to leave to those that come behind me?
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes that punch in the
Hmm.
gut that's
Hmm.
a tough punch.
Yeah.
And
You're
that's
answering
when we learn. That's
you're
how we
answering
get better.
you're answering the question ultimately, the ultimate question, which is who am I?
Mhm.
And once you get a handle on who you are, then everything seems to fall into place, doesn't it? And go ahead, you were going to say something.
Well, it does. You make a great point, Jerry, because for me, I think looking back, even as a young coach, kind of my identity was all wrapped up in, winning. I
Yeah.
wanted to stand on the top box no matter what. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to win the national championship. I wanted to, all that stuff. But that somewhat became my identity, and it really wasn't who I am as a person. You
Yeah.
know, I've got five grown kids now. My audience has always been those five.
Mm.
There's an audience behind that, but that five, those children, and sometimes I've let them down. I've made poor decisions, but I've got great relationships with all of them. But it's, under like you said, who really am I? There will come a time for all of us. Hopefully, it's way down the road, years and years and years and years to come. But there's going to become a time where we're 6 feet under, or we're cremated, or whatever somebody wants to do, and at that point you look back, who we were as people, what impact we had on other people, how did we positively influence others, what kind of encourager were
Yeah.
we?
Yeah.
I think all that it so as we go through things in life, I think it's always important to remember that.
Well, these big transition moments, right, bring these two things together. Like, who am I? And then when I'm answering that self-honesty piece, right? Because if you're going to lie to yourself of who am I, you're toast. And you have these moments. And certainly, like, I don't think there's really any job nearly like coaching where you've pretty much entered a profession where you're guaranteed to get fired. Like, who does that? Like that's, you're, I mean, and I have friends who are professional soccer coaches, and that's probably the worst, and they worked in England and whatever. And it's like, you have a bad month, you're out the door, there's no, you're getting relegated. You're costing your club $100 million if you don't win these games. And so it's crazy, the pressure. But in these transitional moments of your life, because I think, another big one is going from assistant coach at UCLA to head coach Murray State, right? That's a big thing where you got to ask, who am I, and what's this program going to be? And then you lose a job at Alabama or NC State. It's the same thing. Like, those growth moments is to ask yourself and then really be honest with that answer, isn't it?
It is, and you reminded me of something. I was 23 years old, John. I'm assistant coach at UCLA. I was a graduate assistant my very first year, and we're playing at Cal. Jim Herrick was the head coach, and my first year, and I'm trying to learn. I'm that eager. That basically you're an intern as a GA. You're learning. You're trying to get your hands into everything. And we're going to our shoot around 11 o'clock, and I scoot up to the front row. He's sitting there, and I sit beside him. And I leaned to my right, and I said, Coach, what's the biggest difference between being an assistant coach and a head coach? And I was expecting this eloquent answer, this long. And he turned and looked to his left, and he said, loneliness.
Mm.
That was it. And then when I became a head coach, I learned it. When you're sitting in that top seat and you're the CEO or whoever you're in sports, you're the head coach. Uh, your assistant coaches are wonderful and they help. Players are wonderful. Family's wonderful. But you also realize this is a lonely seat to sit in because sometimes we don't have our peers, that we can, and it's important to develop that. But at the end of the day, that GID moment, you got to make a decision, and it's going to be your decision. Some are good, some aren't good, and and in coaching, it happens. It happens in life. It's in every field, but in our field of coaching, it can happen quick. Where you know teams struggling, not winning, whatever happens, and boom, here comes. They make a change, and it's difficult. But that lesson of leadership, there's so many things about leadership that are teachable things that are amazing. But for me, that one rang true. It is lonely sometimes to go from being that assistant to being the head coach.
Yeah. I mean, I think of, every head coach out there, and I think business is doing this better than sports, right? Where they get their C-level people, an executive coach, someone to talk to, a neutral voice. And we've had many coaches on this podcast say that same thing, sometimes in different words, but it's lonely. As a head coach in college, you don't really, who do you have to talk to, right? Like you can't call you can't call Kentucky and be like, "Hey, help me out with this." They're like, "No, thank you." And maybe you're in an athletic department where you can go to the other coaches, but having that neutral outside experience voice, right? I was just reading this article a couple weeks ago about Sean McVay, the football coach, and he was talking about, and he had won the Super Bowl and kind of lost himself. And the next year they didn't make the playoffs, and it was just he was miserable and he was thinking of quitting. And out of the blue, a coach named Chris Peterson called him, who'd been at Boise State and Washington, and just said, I see in you me 20 years ago," and just became his mentor. So do you think every coach, especially at that level, needs a mentor? And who did you have for yourself?
I think it's such an important thing for anybody who's in that highest leadership position. Because like you said, when I was an assistant coach, and not that we were, but we could get together and we could say to each other privately, this guy should be playing instead of that. You have somebody to vent and bounce things off of and talk through things. Sometimes the head coach you don't.
Yeah.
And whether that's your closest friends that you trust, for me, I always had my dad. My dad had been a college basketball coach and an athletic director. My uncle Mike, his brother. Um, where you can get on the phone and kind of bare your soul a little bit. Like, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that, or man, I've got to make this decision and I'm wrestling with this decision. And sometimes even the people that you've trusted, entrusted your decision with, sometimes you might disagree with them. I may disagree with my dad. My dad might say, "Hey, Mark, well, when I coached, I had this situation. Here's how I handled it." And sometimes the answer is, "Wow, that was wonderful." Other times I might say, I'm not sure. But I still think it's good to have that you build, a group of guys that you can be accountable to, but you also want to pick their brains at times. And, for me, like Lorenzo Romar was the head coach at Washington for years and years. We were together at UCLA. We played for Athletes in Action together. There were times where he'd call me, I'd call him. And, he may have something going on with a player or whatever it may be. And it was great just to talk, just to, because as a head coach, usually on your campus, I don't have anybody on my campus. Maybe the football coach or the baseball coach, but it's a little different. And so I personally think for all, and I talk to coaches all the time. I'm on the phone with guys every day, and the same thing. Build that group around you that can. You got to have somewhere that you can escape and be honest and say, "Man, I'm struggling with this decision. I got to make it. It's a tough one." Boom, and you want good input, like anybody would.
And then there are the coaches that you don't usually have that much communication with that aren't really your friends, that are your competitors, such as being in the ACC. Hello, right? I mean, we have Coach K, we have Roy Williams, we have. Is there anything there as an opponent to these teams like Duke and Carolina that was really great for you being in such a conference where you would learn something from these arguably great coaches, right? I'm just curious.
Well, you're always learning. I always wanted to learn and even learn from our opponents. Tony Bennett was another one at Virginia.
Yeah,
Fabulous. I'm talking
yeah.
about fabulous. Now, if you go through when I was in the ACC, you got Jim Boeheim, got Rick Pitino, Roy Williams, Coach K. Matter of fact, one year we had wins over all four of those guys. I think they said it was the only time, four Hall of Famers, which was amazing. But Tony Bennett, Jim Larinaga down at
Yeah.
Miami. You're talking
Amazing.
about you're talking
Amazing.
about top of the line. You're talking about the best of the best. But when I was at NC State, I'm 12 to 15 miles away from North Carolina and Duke. I mean,
Yeah.
you're smothered by that right there in
Right.
the triangle in North Carolina. And Roy was fabulous to me. Just could not have been better. We did some commercials together. We had interactions, but couldn't have been better. Mike was a little bit different, a little guarded, but I loved the competition against them, and I loved the you know trying to figure out how do we beat them because you're being forced to evaluate the best of the best and how are
Right.
they going to
Right.
coach the game, the players, even in recruiting. Like we had battles now, like battles in recruiting, and but you're going up against blue bloods that have been there for a long time and had done really well, and two of the guys that maybe two of the best that's ever coached. But for me, I loved the competition, loved it, and because those guys had done such a great job.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
amazing. If you could, looking back on your career, if there's anything that you could change or anything that you wish you did more of that would have made a big difference, or and maybe just sort of one other level of that, what's something that you know now that you wish you knew at 23 that would have made a big difference for all the coaches listening to this, just getting started?
If I were to look back over 33 years in coaching and I think 20 something or other as a head coach, even though I wanted to have great relationships with my guys, I wish that they were even better. The wins and the losses, those are important. Trophies and plaques and awards and hey, we beat this team and we went to the Elite Eight and those are wonderful. Those are all wonderful. But even though I wanted great relationships with my players, if I look back and I were to tell a young coach, boy, don't overlook that because when it's all said and done and you get a little bit older, you're going to look back and the relationships that you built with your players that will last forever. They're going to last your lifetime. You're going to be in your 60s and 70s. And I'm going to give you a real quick story. I know we got to go at time, but a couple years ago, one of my college teammates, Jim Farmer, and I was in Nashville. He lived in Nashville. I said, Jim, let's get in the car and drive to Birmingham to see Wimp Sanderson, our college coach. Wimp is now 87, just lost his wife, Annette. And we went to Birmingham. We took him to lunch, came back. I thought I'd be there for an hour. We go sit in a study. He's got a room with some of his, memorabilia. We stayed there for 4.5 hours and we talked
Mm.
about stories, this game, this locker room, and we got on his front porch and we're getting ready to say goodbye. And he reached out and hugged us and started crying.
Mm,
And so
Mm.
you can, like for me, you can tell me about all the wins and losses and trophies and championships and all that. That's wonderful, wonderful things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nothing,
Nothing.
nothing will replace the depth that you have for somebody that you care about like that as a coach. So for me, that would be it. Even though I wanted it to be good, I still wanted it to be better.
So I got to just throw this in here, and John's heard this story 10,000 times. But Mark, I was working at Carolina, working with Anson Dorrance, the soccer coach, and lacrosse, and my greatest dream was to have a meeting and to meet my hero, which was Dean Smith, Coach Dean Smith. And he was still there. And I thought he had retired, which he did, but he still kept in office and he would be there. And like if Roy or somebody had a question, he was always there for them or the players. And I went in there one day and I won't tell the whole story, but he came over to me and he said, Dr. Lynch, what an honor to meet you. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? No, please don't put me in that position. I'm here because I admire you and the coaching. And like to me, he was the John Wooden of the East Coast, right?
Yes.
And by the end of that meeting, which was 45 minutes long, I had tears in my eyes. I would have done anything for that man because he made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. And I know I wasn't, but I felt that way. And I would have licked the basketball court of the dust to have them practice if that's what it took. And he never asked me, right? I wound up doing something better even is writing a book in his honor and dedicating it to him called Coaching with Heart. But that feeling is exactly what you're talking about. I felt so honored. It changed my career. I made a shift, and John knows this, more into the leadership piece because I realized how powerful is that. And so again, it gets right back to what you were talking about, relationships, and of course, relationships with integrity, being vulnerable, being open, being authentic. And this hour spending with you, I'm so glad we had this opportunity because that really radiated through the screen to me.
Hmm.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Last question, Mark, is, and I want you to just give people, how can people connect with you, websites, if they want to just hear your speaking and stuff like that. But then also, is there anything that that you wish we asked you that we failed to ask?
No, let me say this first. To reach me and find me, it's just coachmarkgottfried.com. You can find me. Everything's on there. Speaking opportunities, which I'm actually having a ball with because I feel like I'm impacting people and helping them.
Hmm.
And I do a podcast which has been so much fun. So if they go to coachmarkgottfried.com, you're going to find everything about me. But I'll say this, guys, I'm on a lot of podcasts. I do my own podcast, the Coach Mark Gottfried Show, and it's on Spotify and all those things. But this has been fun. This has been enjoyable for me because you guys have done a great job where you dig in a little deeper on everything, and that's what we all want. That's how we get better. That's how we improve. And so uh thank you guys for having me on. This has been a special time for me as well.
Thank you. We,
What a
we have to
wonderful
peel
comment.
we have to peel through that 30 years of media training and get at the hardest stuff. But Mark, this was a wonderful talk. I mean, the themes that we hit, honesty, integrity, vulnerability, all these sort of things. This is what leadership is about. This is what coaching's about, and you really brought it out. So, on behalf of Jerry and I and all of our listeners, thank you so much for being on the Way of Champions podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys. Been a
Jerry, that was a great conversation, and I mean, we really appreciate Mark's compliment at the end because we did go deep on that one, didn't we? I mean, we
We did.
really
Yeah.
kind of peeled back the layers of the onion there of what's coaching and what's leadership, and I really appreciated how much he shared. It wasn't all just the highlights and the wins, but the low moments and the mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big part of that world.
I think it's so important. The better we get at our craft, we're going to master our craft, and that's what we do. We try to get better and better as co-host, and one of the things that I believe is important is to go a little deeper with the guest and ask the more deeper, more important questions. And he certainly took that on in a very kind way. And but I think what happens is when you start out the interview, we don't know yet. But after about a half hour, I realized, and so did you, that, this man might want to just take a little deeper dive into what he's experienced and what that means for all of us, the listeners, to self-evaluate. Who are you? What is the thing you like most about yourself? What is the thing you like least about yourself? And our cohort has answered all those questions, and we see the benefit of that and how we can open up to be a better version of ourselves. One of the things that really, really impressed me was his relationship with John Wooden, which I
Hmm.
really loved. I didn't think he would have it because he was there way after John Wooden.
Hmm.
John Wooden retired, I think, in 75, and Mark was there. They won the championship in 95.
Yeah.
But having said that, when he said, the thing that I remember is that John wouldn't learn that he'd rather have a softer voice and have people come to lean in to hear him
Mhm.
as opposed to having a harsh voice where people they want to close their ears. Wasn't that brilliant?
Yeah, it was that was brilliant. I mean, his two, he had a couple of them, but his two woodenisms, the other one, the softest
Woodenisms, yeah.
pillow,
The
the
pillow.
softest pillow is a clear conscience, and I think that is such a great advice for us as coaches
Yeah.
and leaders is
Yeah.
that, we if we can sleep well at night, that's the goal. That's the
Yeah.
feeling we're seeking.
Yeah.
um, and then the best stuff comes from that. But
The other thing, John, I liked was, this idea we talked about self-awareness, right? And I asked him, what does he like least about himself? And I think for the listeners here, and again, we've gone through a week with our cohort on this one, is, you can't really become the best version of yourself or the best coach or leader or partner or father or whatever it happens to, a mother, is unless you ask that question and discover what is it that you like least about. And I ask that question of myself like every 6 months. When I come up with the answer, now I have the data and the proof because I'm coming up with it. This is what I want to work on. If I don't like this, what are the three things I can do so that I can eliminate what I like least about myself? And that's part of the journey, isn't it?
it's definitely the journey. And for those who are like, what's the cohort, right? Jerry and I just finished up 4 days in the Rocky Mountains, 9,000 feet with 30 amazing coaches, just working on self-awareness and leadership and culture. And it was the
Yeah.
first time we had really taken that deep a dive with coaches. And at the end of it, I mean, the connection amongst the group, the
Hmm.
the the questions, the love, the laughs, the joy, the tears, everything was incredibly powerful. I mean, we were blown away of the level it went to, and it just
Yeah.
really reaffirmed
Well,
for
yeah.
us. Let me just say, it just really reaffirmed for us how much everything we just talked about in the last hour with Mark
Oh,
is
absolutely.
so critical for coaching. And that
Absolutely.
lonely that how many of those coaches talked about that feeling of loneliness of I
Yeah.
don't know who to turn to, and I don't know myself yet, and I
Yeah.
carrying stuff that's maybe not
Yeah.
helpful. We've just realized how important this is in the future of our work together to continue this work,
Well,
because it's
hear,
really
hearing
what
it,
coaches know
hearing
need.
it, yeah, hearing it from him today. It was the first podcast we had done since that conference, that certification. But hearing it from Mark, who we respect as a really fine leader, uh, just reinforces what we kind of already knew. But it's so great to have that affirmation. And by the way, we were at 9,000 feet physical elevation, but emotionally and spiritually and mentally, we were about 27,000, weren't we? We're right
Yeah,
up there.
we
Yeah.
were up there for sure. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, listen, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you to all of our premium members and Patreon podcast champions who support the podcast. Thanks to Sprocket Sports for everything that you do and have supported us for the last couple of years. It's been just amazing. Remember, everyone, your influence is never neutral. And Mark talked a lot about today how important your influence is on people, the things you say, the things you do. So go out there and be aware of it and use it for good, right? And we'll see you again next week.
God, I wish I thought of that.
Bye, everyone.